I solemnly swear that I am up to no good.
Hello, all the good people on the internet. Welcome back or welcome to Can't I Potter, a Harry Potter and Wizarding World podcast hosted by Akshay Nair. In this episode, I will be covering chapter 4 from Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. It had lots of information that I wanted to talk about, and because of that, it became a longer episode than I had intended to. But if you want even longer episodes, which might even touch the mark of 50 to 60 minutes, please do give me your feedback, as currently I am planning all episodes to be in the 20 to 35 minutes mark. You can mail your suggestions at cantipotterpodcast@gmail.com, or you can become a member in Can't I Potter's Buy Me a Coffee account, and you can send me message and suggestions there also. You can become a member by going to the link www.buymeacoffee.com/cantipotter. Since we ended the last episode on a cliffhanger, I can't wait to start this episode. Without wasting much time, let's dive into episode 3 of Can't I Potter. This chapter just continued from the last one, where Harry heard a loud boom at the front door of the New Dursley castle, surrounded by the sea, which was supposed to be a safe house, according to Uncle Vernon. Listening to this commotion at the front of his safe palace, Uncle Vernon came down running into the room carrying a rifle. "Who's there?" he shouted. "I warn you, I am armed." Smash! The door came clean off its hinges and crashed landed on the floor. Standing in front of all the Dursleys and Harry in the doorway was a giant man with his face completely hidden by his beard and hair. He then came into the room with complete authority and sat on the sofa as if he didn't care that the Dursleys were standing there, and Uncle Vernon was pointing a rifle towards him this whole time. But not for long, as this giant of a man jerked the gun out of Uncle Vernon's hand and tied it into a knot as easily as the rifle was made of rubber. Till now, this giant has not introduced himself, but we, the readers, know that this is Hagrid, who gave baby Harry to Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall, and they left Harry on the doorstep of the Dursleys almost 11 years ago. I think so. Yeah, it's 11 years ago. Also, this is the first time of the many bazillion times when someone has said to Harry that he looks like his dad but has his mother's green eye. Now, you also know that Harry looks like his dad but has his mother's eyes. So, in this exchange, we also got a hint as to how much Hagrid cared for Harry, as he bought Harry's first ever birthday cake. The giant, as J.K. Rowling described Hagrid to be, might be described as a gentle half-giant. I presume it just sounds way better, even though it doesn't mean anything, cause how can we call someone a giant to be a half-giant? I promise you, this sentence sounded way better inside my head before I spoke it. So sorry if that sentence didn't make any sense. Now, this is when Hagrid formally introduces himself to Harry and the readers that he is Rubius Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts, saying that he nonchalantly lit up the fire and made himself some tea and sausages. Did you never wondered where your parents learnt it all? Hagrid asked. While talking to Harry, Hagrid realized that the Dursleys did not tell Harry anything about Hogwarts and did not give him the letters that were addressed to him. This is when we saw the difference in power dynamics between Hagrid and the Dursleys. As in his anger, when Hagrid stood up, he seemed to have filled the entire room, and the Dursleys were cowering against the wall. This vividly depicts the disparity between the worlds of wizardry and ordinary muggles. These two worlds were represented by authority figures, and we see how Mr. Dursley's manic obstinity contrasts sharply with Hagrid's serene dominance. This conflict between Mr. Dursley and Hagrid is scarcely a power battle, as Hagrid is clearly the victor in the two-men standoff. Then Hagrid said the famous lines that became the internet meme material. Brace yourself. Here the line comes. Harry, you're a wizard. Yes, these lines brings back the good old memories when I read this series for the first time. With this, there was a complete silence in the house. I loved how J.K. Rowling took her time to get to this part, and after that, she also gave this scene time to breathe and register in the reader's mind. Hagrid then handed over the letter that was addressed to Harry for him to read. At last, at last, it's about damn time he got the letters that was for him. Now, let us also read the letter alongside Harry, as we are also in this journey with him. Let's open the letter first. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Headmaster Albus Dumbledore, Order of Merlin, Class 1, Grand Sorcerer, Chief Warlock, Supreme Mugwump, International Confederation of Wizards. Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have a place at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find enclosed a list of all necessary books and equipments. Term begins on 1st September. We await your owl no later than 31st July. Yours sincerely, Minerva McGonagall. After reading this letter, I realized that the moment has come when Harry, as the letter refers to him as, becomes a young Mr. H. Potter, capable of living his own life and forging his own path. This is even personified by when Hagrid gave Harry the chocolate cake. This demonstrates for the first time that Harry is no longer reliant on the Dursleys for his sustenance. This growth is symbolized by his departure from Dursleys at the end of chapter 4. Perhaps, I believe this entire series, now when I backtrack and think, is about a child growing into an adult. After reading this letter, Harry had so many questions, and this is a valid reaction for anyone who would be reading a letter like this for the first time. But before he could even act on this, Uncle Vernon came in and opposed the prospect of Harry going to Hogwarts. It was during this altercation between Uncle Vernon and Hagrid that we, for the first time, got the definition of who Muggles are. It's written as they are peoples who are non-magical. So prior to this, Minerva McGonagall had mentioned about Muggles, but they never told us who Muggles were, or we didn't got a proper definition of who these Muggles were. So once again, Uncle Vernon and Hagrid got into an argument, and during this whole argument, we also realized that how petty, jealous, and selfish Aunt Petunia was, and that's the reason she treated Harry so awfully. It was because of all the baggage of aggression and hate that she had for her little sister Lily. This is the part where I want to tell you to keep an eye on all the adults in this series, as J.K. Rowling has written all the adults to be not perfect. And I would say that's a brilliant move, because once I became an adult, I understood everyone is not perfect. All the characters who are adults that J.K. Rowling had written, they all have flaws, and they have their own insecurity and past trauma that still haunts them. This indicates how they behave with others and how this affects their relationship for better and worse. I believe that with this, J.K. Rowling tried to explain to kids who were reading these books that yes, adults know more than them, that is the kids, but that doesn't make them perfect. No one is perfect, and even their parents are not. I presume that's something that J.K. Rowling was trying to explain to kids through this particular series. It's one of the things that she wanted to explain. I just don't want to talk more about this topic because I believe I will spill out some spoilers, which I don't want to, because going through this series, there are many more examples wherein this particular scene wherein we could see that adults are not perfect and they have their own flaws, and probably these children are better than them in some aspects. So if I will be talking more about it, then definitely there would be spoilers, and I don't want that to come in this particular episode that I'm talking about. Because the main reason is, what if someone is reading this book for the first time and is simultaneously listening to this podcast? I know it's very unlikely, but just in case, it's better to be cautious rather than to be sorry. So that's the reason why I'm not trying to go into the spoilers part. Coming back to Petunia, her jealousy and pettiness is personified in these lines where she talks about her sister Lily. Let me read it line by line so that you can get a better understanding of how self-centered and jealous she was. "You knew," said Harry. "You knew I am a wizard." "Knew?" shrieked Aunt Petunia suddenly. "Knew? Of course I knew. How could you not be? My dreaded sister being what she was. Oh, she got a letter just like that and disappeared off to that school and came home every holiday with her pockets full of frog spawn, turning teacup into rats. I was the only one who saw her for what she was, a freak. But for my mother and father, oh no. It was Lily this and Lily that. They were proud of having a witch in the family. Then she met that Potter at school, and then left and got married and had you. And of course I knew you were just the same, just as strange, just as abnormal as them. If you please, she went and got herself blown up, and we got landed with you." In this whole monologue from Petunia, apart from realizing that she is jealous towards her sister Lily, we can see that the Dursleys always were conscious about the two worlds that were existing Rollins could have kept the Dursleys in the dark about this magical world until Hagrid arrived, but instead, she had them live in denial for 10 years. This denial is noteworthy because it implies that normal people suppresses unpleasant or potentially humiliating truth in order to appear normal. Remember at the starting of the first chapter where they said that they are completely normal. This is what they said. Rollins wanted to talk about. Like they are completely normal. They are completely normal as us who are potentially hiding and the humiliating truths about us. And because of that, we don't even want to talk about stuff that hurt us. That's a good way of writing that I really appreciated. And I think so I am reading too much into the lines, but this is what I felt. Coming back to the book, once Petunia talks about her sister Lily, this is when Harry realized that his parents didn't die in a car crash. And later, Hagrid told Harry that they were killed by the evil wizard Voldemort. While Hagrid talked about Voldemort, we also got an understanding of how people are still afraid of him, even though he had supposedly died 11 years ago when he tried to kill Harry. Hagrid explained the whole story of Voldemort, that Voldemort was a great wizard who went bad later on and got into power 20 years ago. That is all approximately 9 years before Harry was born. The constant deaths and the state of panic that people faced due to Voldemort and his supporters. And this whole thing had created a kind of panic with the whole wizarding world, and how if anyone stood against him or his supporters, they were eliminated immediately. We also got to know that Dumbledore is the only wizard that Voldemort feared the most, and that's why he never faced him. But since Dumbledore was moving against Voldemort and he couldn't let that happen, Voldemort made sure that he eliminated all the supporters of Dumbledore, and that included Harry's mom and dad. In the next few lines, J.K. Rowling once again created the suspense that is necessary to keep the readers interested and involved in this reading process. For example, Hagrid said that you know who tried to kill all the Potter family to make it a clean job. But for some reason, he couldn't kill Harry. Also, that's where he got the lightning bolt scar. In this whole scene, this is unsure about what happened to Voldemort, as he just vanished that day, and some people think he died and some think he's just biding his time to come back more stronger and more powerful. Once Harry heard this, he remembered his dream where he saw a blinding green light, and this time he remembered it was more clear and more recollected, and he heard a high, cold, cruel laugh. Like I told you last time, the dreams that Harry have a very big importance in this whole series. So this is once again J.K. Rowling pointing it out that the dreams that Harry had in chapter 1 had an implication in chapter 4. So just keep an eye on the dreams that Harry have. Hagrid ended his sentence by saying, "No one ever lived after he decided to kill them. No one except you, Harry. He even killed the best witches and wizards of his age, the Mackinons, the Bones, and the Proverts." By the way, I must not say this through this serious scene that's happening, but I really like this name, the Bones. Like it sounded like the Bond. Like they would come in and say we are like Bones, like Harry Bones. No, it sounded stupid, but yeah. I wish we could meet them, but I believe it's too late since the Bones have already died. Uncle Vernon once again came in with his own explanation that he will not send Harry to be taught by some crazy, stupid, old crackpot fool. But this time, Vernon went too far, and that too with someone who was not a 10 or 11 years old child. Therefore, this time Vernon got to know the consequences of his action. But in fact, it was not Vernon technically who got to know the consequences of Vernon's action. It was Dudley who had to face Hagrid's wrath when someone insulted Dumbledore. Hagrid swished his umbrella, and there was a flash of violet light and sound like a firecracker. And the next second, Dudley was dancing on spot. When he turned his back on them, Harry saw a curly pig's tail poking out through a hole in his trouser, thus proving that Harry was right all this time. Dudley is in fact a pig with a wig. I know I should not talk about a child like that, but we know it's all an imaginary thing and there's nothing real about it. So let's take it in that way, because it's not like Voldemort is really there and he will be coming over here, and I don't want to here again there's a spoiler coming up. Okay. Just after this, we got another piece of news that was surprising for both us as readers and Harry. Hagrid said he was not supposed to use magic as he was expelled from Hogwarts in his third year and his wand was snapped. But Dumbledore let him keep his wand and made him the gamekeeper. Now, here, Harry had the same question that I had, but I have a couple more. Firstly, why was he expelled? This was the exact same question that Harry had, but I have more. Second, if his wand was broken, why was he allowed to have the remnants of it by Dumbledore? Third, how much power did Dumbledore have in the say as to who can be appointed to Hogwarts? We know his influence as we read all the position that he holds from the letter that we read that Harry got. But I believe these were valid questions that were not answered in this chapter. So we have to wait, I presume, to get these answers, or we might not. This is something I don't remember much about whether we get the answer about to these questions, but let's see. Probably in this book or by the book 5th, 5th or 6th, we might get the answer. I don't remember this particular part. Let's see. Let's go ahead. So with this, we came to an end of this chapter and this episode. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Also, I want a small favor from you guys. Please do like, subscribe or follow this podcast from whichever platform you're listening to. And please do leave a review, or you can send a review through sending me a mail at cantipotterpodcast@gmail.com, or you can become a member of my Buy Me a Coffee account, that is www.buymeacoffee.com/cantipotter. In that way also you can connect to me and give me a few of the suggestions that how I could improve this podcast. Don't forget to tell your friends about this podcast, as word of mouth is the best type of promotion that you can give to a podcast like mine, where I'm just started this as a passion project, and hopefully it will get better and bigger. So hopefully this will happen with your help. And if you can help this podcast even further, please listen to this message that I will be playing, so you can help me improve this quality of the podcast and also help others in need. Thank you for listening to my podcast until the very end. Like I had mentioned during the episode about a way you can help my podcast, it will just take 2 minutes of your time to help me. For that, I have created a Buy Me a Coffee account. The link is www.buymeacoffee.com/cantipotterpodcast. This is a place where you can donate for this podcast or become a permanent member. Since this podcast is something that I have started as a passion project, I want you all to participate in this cause, which is why I have kept the base membership of this podcast as just $3. I will use these donations for the improvement of this podcast, and my first checklist is to buy a good quality mic that will definitely improve the audio quality that you are currently hearing. As I am currently using a smartphone speaker, and since you can hear it's not the very best, so that's something I would like to use these donations to buy a particularly good mic that I could use for this podcast. One more thing I will be doing is that I will be using these donations that you are giving me for an initiative that I will be starting. That is, for every member that I would be having in Buy Me a Coffee/Canti-Potter account, I will be donating $1 per member for a charitable cause every month once I get 10 members. From the time I will get 10 members, I'll be starting to donate $1 per member for a charitable cause. This is something that I always had in my mind to act in a way that could help others, but I never was in this type of a financial situation where I could help others. I thought instead of waiting for me to be financially stable or to have a financial status where I could help others, I could use what I am getting from this podcast and use that as a platform to help others. And the main reason, or we can say the catalyst for this charitable cause that I've thought of, is my parents, because I had seen how difficult it was for them to earn the daily bread and also afford to give me and my sibling a quality education. Now, since I am in a position where I can get some amount, I would like to share the same with other people who are in need. So that's also something that I would be doing with this podcast. Also, one very important thing, this Buy Me a Coffee account is not at all a compulsion that you have to give a part of your hard-earned money to some guy on the internet whom you have never even met in your life. So if you don't want to be a member of this podcast, I can really understand, and without being a member, you can help me. I would be really glad if you can take some time out and like this particular episode, follow and subscribe Canti-Potter in Spotify or wherever you are listening, and also in YouTube. If you're listening through YouTube, you can just follow and subscribe and give a like to this particular episode, and I will be really happy if you do that, because that will also help the algorithm and help me improve the quality of the podcast. Also, if you feel that there are ways where I could improve this podcast, you can send me a mail at cantipotterpodcast@gmail.com with all your suggestions and tips to improve this podcast. So that's the only thing I just wanted to talk to you about, and thank you once again.